Prime Minister Narendra Modi, these are pictures we are getting of Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the Chinese President Xi Jinping. They are at the Xian Guesthouse. The two of them are meeting. Prime Minister Narendra Modi, in fact, to welcome him, the Chinese President has come down to Xian. And is this just reciprocity? Just because Prime Minister Narendra Modi invited the Chinese President to Ahmedabad, took him for a walk around the Sabarmati riverfront, had a cultural extravaganza organized for him, and this is reciprocal, or is there much more to this gesture? Bharat Karnad, Professor Bharat Karnad, research professor at Center for Policy Research, with me in the studio. Also with me is Chandrasekhar Dasgupta, India's former ambassador to China. But I want to quickly cut across to headlines today's managing editor Rahul Kanwal, who joins us from Xian. Rahul, take it away.
Gaurav, this is far more than just a reciprocal gesture. Dismiss this as a reciprocal gesture wouldn't be doing justice to the kind of effort the Chinese president is making here. This needs to be seen in context. A, Prime Minister Modi has set a template whenever he goes, wherever he goes, whether it's to Paris, where he wants to be on a boat along the river, or the swinging in Gujarat when he was there. For him, this is standard. This is the standard. But for the president of China, this has not been the template. He's never welcomed any world leader anywhere outside of Beijing. This is the first time that he's come to Xi'an, and he's invited a world leader to come to Xi'an and see his native province. The other thing to look at, Gaurav, is that usually the Chinese are very, very particular about protocol, as you well know yourself. In their pecking order, in their governance structure, Li Qiang, who's the premier, is the equivalent of Prime Minister Modi. Instead, Li Qiang is nowhere in the picture, at least just yet. Xi Jinping is taking charge himself and pushing this dialogue on a one-on-one basis, and that shows the effort, because they believe that the bureaucrats and the officials are not being able to push through. There were so many various deals which were being attempted. Let me talk about the river data water sharing pact, for example, where all Chinese rivers and the level of water flow in those rivers was to be handed over in real time. The data was to be handed over in real time to the Indian side. At the last moment, the deal fell through, which is supposed to be one of the big takeaways from this visit. That deal never came about. Now, the bureaucrats haven't been able to find a way forward. They're hoping that when the principals meet, they will be able to make some substantial things to look at. One, Prime Minister Modi had Amit Shah cancel his meeting with the Dalai Lama in the build-up to this visit. And secondly, there's been no border incursion that's been reported almost since that major border incursion that you reported on very extensively when the Chinese president was, yes, of course, the border problem continues to fester, but it's more a sore than a wound where gangrene needs to be done. So that's the difference, that you've got situations slightly under control, slightly better than where things were, and now it needs to be seen whether the two principals in this dialogue that they're having, can they find a way of being able to push through.
Stay with me, Rahul. Ambassador, do you see this situation different from the past? You've been our ambassador to China. How is Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit different?
I'd say it builds upon previous visits. It's not something which is startlingly different. It continues the process of gradual improvement of relations between India and China, and is very important in that respect. And Xi'an is a great starting point for his tour. I think it was very well chosen by the Chinese side. It symbolizes both the ancient historic contacts between India and China, because it lay at one terminal, the eastern terminal of the Silk Road, and at the same time it also symbolizes Chinese hopes and aspirations regarding one belt, one road, the new Silk Road.
The new Silk Road. Because
Xi'an again has a great sort of symbolic importance, significance in that context.
Okay. Professor, is there a change this time? In the past, whether when former Prime Minister Manmohan Singh visited Beijing or when Chinese President Xi Jinping came to India, there was an incursion at the line of actual control both times. And defense analysts say that each time there is a state visit, there is an incursion, because they want this message to go across that this 4,000-kilometer long border is a big dispute. This time, no reports yet. Is that a change?
Well, yes, I think most of the incursions have been by the Chinese. So it's usually when Xi Jinping visited India that you had as a backdrop
Chumar,
the PLA troops intruding into Chumar. So I think the thing here is that the meeting in Xian also suggests that, insofar as Xi thinks that Modi prizes his provincial roots in Gujarat and he had a welcome there, he had to similarly stress his roots in Xian. So you have a certain complementarity, as it were, that's being shown. And I think she wants to build on the personalized aspects of bilateral relations. In this case, his personal relations with the Indian Prime Minister, and wants to build on it and consolidate it, because he thinks that that will get him more dividend, because Modi himself stresses that aspect. So you have a certain, shall we say, a reinforcement of what Xi believes Modi prizes, and Modi in fact reciprocating the political capital he has invested, personal capital he has invested in the relationship.
So what's the dividend that China is looking at, Rahul?
Gaurav, the two industrial parks that were spoken of when President Xi came to India, there hasn't been much forward movement on. Whether it's the park in Pune or the one in Vadodara, even the process of land acquisition hasn't been completed. In Beijing, they were able to build a skyscraper in 19 days. 19 days to build a skyscraper, and here in little under a year, they haven't even got land. And you know the kind of trouble Prime Minister Modi has been back home for his amended, updated, slightly more corporate-friendly land acquisition bill. So the Chinese believe that the Prime Minister needs to translate some of this talk into action when it comes to the several things that have been spoken of. One of the key specifics is the Delhi to Chennai high-speed rail corridor. Now, the feasibility study for this $36 billion project is currently underway, and they're hoping that at least the Delhi to Agra or the Chennai to Bengaluru link able to sign and try as a pilot project. The Chinese are saying, let's build it for you. Let's show the Indian people what this is. Remember, the Japanese and the Chinese are in close competition, but the Indian Railways hasn't been quite as enthusiastic. The problem is because for so long, the China policy has been dominated by the security establishment. Forward movement is really difficult because how can you open up a sensitive infrastructure sector like the railways to Chinese companies? That kind of seems to be holding the Indian side back. The Indian Railways believes it's not a viable project. You're spending a lot of money. Remember, the ticket that we took from Beijing to Xian was almost 8,500 Indian rupees. That's the flight ticket from Delhi to Chennai, possibly, or Delhi to Mumbai. Should you be spending that kind of money on the railways? Those are questions that people have in the Indian context. Those are very relevant questions, of course. But the Chinese have now been able to build 16,000 kilometers of high-speed rail, and it's the pride of China. It's discussed all over the world. So I think while the ambition is there, the ambition is not being translated into reality with the speed that the Chinese want, and that's beginning to irk them. And they're looking for Modi to try and ease that process.
Okay. Ambassador, fair point, but that is what turned China's economic history around, the high-speed railways, and that is an example the world is looking at, whether it's building the Bengaluru-Chennai corridor, the small route, or the Delhi-Agra route. Is that fear still there, that why give China such expensive, crucial infrastructure projects, or have we moved beyond that?
I think the answer to that depends on what segment of infrastructure we are looking at. If it's a question of railways, including high-speed railways, I frankly don't see what the security problem is. But if it is telecommunications, then that's a different game, and you have to exercise due diligence and care. I'm not saying that there shouldn't be cooperation. Of course, we must take that forward. But at the same time, there are security concerns which have to be borne in mind. Okay.
I also want to quickly bring in India Today's Anant Krishnan, who joins us with the latest. Anant had an exclusive interview with Prime Minister Premier Li Keqiang. Anant, as far as India-China relations are concerned, there are two issues. One is this 4,000-kilometer long boundary dispute. The second is Chinese infrastructure projects in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. Are these on the table?
Yes, Gaurav, I think you're absolutely right. These are the two elephants in the room, if you will put it that way. And that's why I think today's meeting is just so important, because Modi and Xi are just about to start what is going to be maybe 5 or 6 hours of one-on-one conversation. And this is, as you know, pretty unprecedented, because usually in the Chinese system, a president usually meets with another president. So it just goes to show the kind of importance they're putting to Mr. Modi's visit. So I think over the next 5 or 6 hours, what's really crucial is that on tough issues like both the boundary question as well as what's happening with the China-Pakistan economic corridor, I think the people on both sides acknowledge that what is required is very strong political will. So, which is why this summit between Modi and Xi has taken on so much importance.
Okay. Professor, will these issues, whether it's the boundary dispute or the infrastructure projects in POK, will they be taken up in the right earnest, or will it be more pro forma? Because you have to do it, so you'll do it.
No, look, the very fact that they're going to have such a long and lengthy one-on-one session suggests in some sense, and perhaps the ambassador will bear me out, that the professional negotiators, meaning the Zhongnan High and MEA at this end, have reached an impasse, meaning they have done as much as they can do at their level. Now it's a political decision on the part of President Xi Jinping and Prime Minister Narendra Modi to push it beyond that threshold. That's the reason why you have such an extended thing, because at each point I think they've reached as much as they could push at their level. And now it requires political intervention. Now whether that is going to resolve many of these issues is still a matter of conjecture. Because there is no certainty, just because the politicians and political leaders have got in, that there'll be a solution.
So what does solution realistically mean? I mean, what can we expect on the boundary dispute? It's 18 rounds of boundary talks have happened. Where have we reached, and what do we expect realistically, Ambassador?
On the boundary issue, I think we can expect some forward movement in boundary management. That is to say, in confidence building measures, etc. After all, there's not been any hostilities, actual firing or deaths, etc. on the border for a long time now, and that must be maintained. And it's essential that the occasional incidents which do arise should be kept down to a minimum number and also minimum intensity. And therefore, it's very important to move ahead with greater contacts among our leaders of our armed forces at the border, to institute new confidence building measures and so on. And I do hope there'll be some progress on that.
Okay. Smita Sharma also joins us from Xian with the latest. Smita, what are your sources in the Ministry of External Affairs and the Prime Minister's office telling you on the issue of stapled visas? I mean, Omar Abdullah said, even I'd like to visit the Terracotta Museum, but I cannot because of stapled visas. So do we expect any forward movement on that?
Not really. Sources seem to suggest that, when it comes to foreign policy, it depends, of course, on the way you take up things. One leader might take it up a little more aggressively, maybe compared to the other, but there are no overnight solutions. It's not like Mr. Modi will return with some sort of a guarantee from the Chinese that they will not be issuing stapled visas anymore to Kashmiris or to people coming in from Arunachal Pradesh. But yes, these are issues that will be, of course, on the table, because these are the two top leaders of their respective nations, two very important countries, which at this point in time, remember, are working together also in a lot of multilateral organizations like BRICS, like SCO. There is also that, the Infrastructure Investment Bank, AIIB, that China has really been pushing for. So while on the economic side, there is that India and China are cooperating on, but on these tough issues, there is much talking that will happen, not resolutions. In fact, resolutions are not coming in at this point.
Okay, Professor, Amit Shah did not meet His Holiness the Dalai Lama before this visit. Now, what impact will this have? Will China appreciate this, or will China see this as India buckling under pressure?
Now, look, I think this is what Beijing expected that India would not do, which is create an incident that they could latch on to. Now, I'm not sure that it helps India's case by, in a sense, holding back on these kinds of gestures. Because the fact is, Tibet is an issue. Tibet is an ongoing problem. for both sides. And the Dalai Lama's exile and his residence in India, is a matter of great, problem with Beijing. They'd like us to, oust him from India. That's not going to happen. No. Nor are we going to give up the Tibet card, such as it is, and such as we have, because a lot of it has already been ceded in terms of suzerainty and then sovereignty and so many other things being ceded by the government of India over the years, which I thought was unilateral and one-sided and not merited.
Yeah.
So the problem is we have eroded our Tibet card, and we don't want to lose what little is left in terms of the Dalai Lama's residence here. But the fact that Amit Shah did not meet suggests that, perhaps the Prime Minister is a little too sensitive about the Beijing's concerns, rather than using it to tell indirectly the Chinese government that, look, you have played these cards, and we might, we have it in our bag, and we could use it at some other, future date.
Okay, the Prime Minister is talking about what has been described as a pragmatic economic approach. We will continue to talk about this in greater detail, and these are the latest pictures that are coming in of that meeting between the Indian delegation headed by Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the Chinese side headed by President Xi Jinping. Ambassador, what happens in these talks? You've been a part of similar talks. What happens in these talks?
These talks, usually you have a formal agenda which is followed item by item. The interventions are well prepared in advance. There are detailed briefs which are given to the principals on both sides. But in addition to these, there very often is a one-to-one meeting. And that allows for a more informal and sort of flexible sort of approach in discussions.
Okay.
So it progresses on two legs, as it were.
Okay. Anant, what is that big takeaway that's likely to come out of these 3 days of talks? What are your sources in both the Chinese camp and the Indian camp telling you?
Well, Gaurav, on the one side, there is a business agreements that are going to be announced in Shanghai on Saturday, and I think that's a little bit more clear, where we are expecting something in excess of $10 billion to be announced by the two sides. This is, of course, just a part of the